Hey, everybody, it's me, Heather Bernt-Santy. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. Joined today by Mike Huber.
Hello.
And Richard Cohen.
Hello.
Yay. Mike, whenever I do a transcript of a show, it always spells your name as Mike and then last name C-U-B-E-R, Huber. You're Mike Huber.
Right.
Yeah, so that's how I picture it in my head now whenever I have to introduce you on the show.
Good to know.
So I don't know, there'll be a nickname coming out of there somehow, depending on how you feel about nicknames. And Richard, welcome again. Glad you're both here.
Always.
Yeah. So we're going to do
a really serious topic today.
It is a serious topic today. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there will be giggling because I giggle, but it is a serious topic and I don't want to take away from it. And this is something, Richard, that you and I started talking about and knew that we had to have Mike in on the conversation too. So this is great. We're going to talk about this controversy about accusations that are being made that including books or intentional teaching or even just appropriate language around gender and sexuality and family structure even has been accused or has been relabeled by some as grooming. And so I've got teachers are being vilified. Yes, thank you. I've got a story from the Washington Post. This was published April 5th. It's by Hannah Natanson and Mariah Ballingitt. The headline is "Teachers Who Mention Sexuality Are, quote, grooming kids," conservatives say. And here's the opening couple sentences of that article. The spokesperson for Florida's Republican governor tweeted in early March that anyone who opposes a bill forbidding teachers from talking about gender identity or sexual orientation with students in early grades is, quote, probably a groomer, or at least you don't denounce the grooming of 4 to 8-year-old children, unquote. A few days later, Fox News host Laura Ingraham asked on national television, quote, when did our public schools, any schools, become what are essentially grooming centers for gender identity radicals, unquote. That pisses me off. I mean,
but before we dive in,
I
want to just make a quick statement, and I think it's on behalf of all three of us.
Mm-hmm.
You correct me if I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
All three of us officially denounce the grooming of children of any age.
Absolutely, Gee, and
so let's just put that
good
out.
Lord, yes, thank you.
Everything we're going to talk about is not grooming.
Yeah.
And anyone who is out there in the world grooming, they are our worst enemies.
And I think we can acknowledge or assert that these kinds of stupid arguments, these kinds of stupid accusations actually do more harm to children when we're trying to protect them from those kinds of dangers.
Yep. And to teachers.
Yeah.
Yep. And so I'm going to jump right in and
please do
talk about the obvious thing that gender identity is how you identify in your gender. So one identity is boy. So any teacher who says, okay, boys line up or go into the boys' bathroom is talking about gender identity. And according to that quote,
supportive of grooming.
Problem, right? So when they ask the quote was, when do people start talking about gender identity? It's happened ever since the word boy and the word girl were used about children in a classroom. So gender identity is always talked about by all teachers. Mm-hmm. So just to lay it out there, the obvious, because that's not what they're actually saying.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll build on that and just say, in one of my classes I teach, I introduce a study, I'm sure you two are familiar with it, where infant caregivers are taken into a room with babies and toys. And if the baby's dressed in blue, they tend to direct the baby toward the trucks and etc. Mm-hmm. And if the child is dressed in pink, they tend to direct that child toward dolls and kitchen related things. And so that lets us know about implicit bias. Mm-hmm. That we human beings are in a world that is gendered and to extents that we don't even realize. And even with infants, we, without even thinking, apply gender identities to infants, not for the purpose of grooming, but because we're enculturated to do it.
Right.
So it starts then.
Right. Indoctrination is already happening, right? We're all of this work. It's just that these folks don't like what we're supportive of. They don't like being more open about the reality of gender and family structures and sexuality.
The same thing, right? That if they talk about, if someone says, oh, don't forget to tell your mommy and daddy, blah, blah, blah. They've just talked about sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Every teacher does it to some degree. The only difference is some teachers will talk about any family structure that is present in the room, and maybe talking about some that aren't present in the room, but that children will encounter in society. So if it's okay, well, one, if the concern is grooming, children will be groomed, whatever. And we didn't even talk about what that means. Do they just mean the child themselves will become gay, or that they'll be susceptible to sexual abuse? But either way, the idea that if you can talk about a child's two dads and that might happen, then we also have to posit that talking about a mom and dad will also do that, because sexuality is not owned by gays, lesbians, straights. It's not owned by anybody. All adults are, well, most adults are sexual in some way.
Yeah.
And so talking about a couple, a husband and wife, two dads, two husbands, whatever, is how you talk to 4 to 8 year olds about sexual orientation.
Right.
Sorry.
No. So let's talk about some definitions. That's a good thing to include here at the beginning. And I'm going to actually defer to you to talk about a definition of gender, because I don't have a comfortable, easy definition that I can just offer. I'm still really learning vocabulary, I guess, kinds of things about being an ally or trying to be an ally. So when we're talking about, let's do this maybe more specifically to our article or to our conversation. When we're talking about gender and sexual identity with this age group, what are we really talking about? What kinds of things might really be happening in a classroom?
Well, we're talking about it arises in a variety of ways. It arises in terms of the biology of how each child eliminates waste, and so it comes up in gendered bathrooms and where we direct children to use the toilet. It comes up in conversations. It comes up in the, again, in the ways that we direct them towards toys or interest centers. We think about gender norms and gender roles in our culture. And unless we're awake and aware of it as early childhood professionals, we know that, the research shows that we tend to send them to particular areas before we even know what they're interested in, based on the gender norms of the culture we're in.
Yeah.
So those are just a couple examples.
Yep. And then I'll take the flip side, and from the child's perspective, I think one of the easiest ways to understand it is gender schema theory has this idea that children are beginning to identify themselves, figure out what they are, how they identify their gender. And then they look at societal clues. So what are the things? If I'm a boy, then these are the things I do. So kind of it's a back and forth, right? That teachers are sometimes steering kids to things, but also they don't have to get steered to everything. But then the child is going to see, oh, okay, I do think of myself as a boy, and boys I've noticed are all wearing blue, or, wearing pants, not wearing dresses, things like that. And so a child will often also be kind of doing things that's generally very outward, very concrete ways of describing that for kids. So it's about what kind of clothes they wear, what toys they play with, what their haircut is like. whether, their nails are colored, maybe earrings, depending on the culture, if they're getting earrings at that age.
Right.
So those things keep coming up.
Mhm.
So you will have kids, if they have a potty accident and need to get underwear, and there's only, the child identifies as a girl and there's only boy underwear,
Yeah.
they will have a tantrum before they'll put on that underwear, because in their mind, doing that, that concrete outward thing about a boy could change, like it doesn't fit them. So children are kind of aware of an internal thing and then how it fits the way society,
Right.
designates clothes.
Yeah. So, but I want to go backwards because I kind of said, let's define it. And then I asked a kind of different question, but, so what would you say, either of you, to a listener who says, yeah, but gender is the genitalia you're born with, and it's one or the other? What are we talking about when we talk about gender identity?
Well, gender identity, I would say, comes from an internal belief that is persistent, consistent, and insistent, right? That you really believe you're whatever gender, so you're insistent on it, you persist with that, and you stay consistent with it, right? So for some children, it doesn't become consistent necessarily, but for most children, vast majority, 99% or whatever, it's pretty consistent. Whether it lines up with genitalia, again, most of the time it would line up in what society would consider it, but not always. And genitalia doesn't always line up that way. There's 13 different conditions that are referred to as intersex. And many of those have to do with the genitalia. And so doesn't matter, what's a legal designation is what's on the birth certificate. They'll usually go by what they see as when the child's born, but those two don't always line up. And then if people really want to get into chromosomes, there's 7 different chromosomal combinations that humans have, and not just XX and XY, most common. And so those don't always line up with what the genitalia is. So you could either say there is no such thing as, well, you could say there's no such thing as two sexes, but you could even say sex and gender are a lot of different things, a whole constellation of things. And then you decide what makes the most, the child decides what makes the most sense. Or the state, in some places they think the state should be deciding that.
Yeah, I don't have this book at home with me because, hold on, Richard, I'll get to you.
Sure.
I don't have this book at home with me because I've been using it in my teaching, but I would recommend. It's called Supporting Gender Diversity in Early Childhood at Classrooms or Education, something like that, Classrooms. And it's Julie Nicholson and Etienne Pascal, and then there's like 4 others who I don't have the book, so I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. And I know people are going to message me and say, what was the name of that book again? Supporting Gender Diversity in Early Childhood Classrooms. Yeah. But anyway, there's a whole chapter called Gender 101 that was so helpful for me. And I think everyone working with young children should at least read that chapter. But it really helped. And it, of course, as you were talking, Mike, I was like, oh yeah, they talked about that. They talked about that. They talked about that. So I just wanted to plug that in. Okay, Richard, do you remember what you were going to?
Yeah. So, I just wanted to add that what Mike just laid out there and explained sits within the context of a larger concept that is very new to mainstream conversation, and that is identity. We never talked about this idea that people have a set of internal beliefs about themselves until really recent years. And so I get that a lot of people resist, are confused by it. It's a new, it creates disequilibrium and cognitive dissonance and all those things because people never even thought about it before. So gender is just one of the ways in which we have our own personal identities. And so then I would just point out the phrase that people have heard bandied around, which is called identity politics. So this idea about identities doesn't just make some of us uncomfortable, like I was describing. It has been used by a certain set of politicians to stoke the fears of the people that don't understand this idea, to be afraid and to dismiss the idea of that human beings have internal identities. And they want the government to regulate that and to create laws around that and to deny that, which is why teachers aren't supposed to even quote unquote talk about it.
Yeah. So let's do a quick definition then too of grooming in this context, because I think that the general accusation is that you are making them more susceptible to being abused or being victimized when we include these kinds of conversations or considerations or books or whatever it is in classrooms. So how do you see that defined, or what does it mean?
Well, I'll jump in on this one, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And the only reason I feel moved to do so is that I've been an openly gay male early childhood professional since the late 80s. And just to paint that picture a little bit, it was the height of the AIDS epidemic. And we didn't know how it was transmitted. We thought you could just touch someone else and get it. So there's a lot of fears, and the same political groups stoking those fears around people like me. And so that was part of it. The other part that had existed long before I was born was the myth of a connection between pedophilia and homosexuality. That if you were a homosexual, you were a pedophile, and that if you were a pedophile, you were most likely homosexual. And so, you know, when I became a new young teacher, I had to make some decisions about how closeted I wanted to be, how explicit I wanted to fight these stereotypes. And much like Barack Obama, I evolved. My understanding evolved over time. And I became much more active in helping people understand that that is a myth and that those are not synonymous, those terms. And so to understand the term grooming, which was where your question began, to my understanding anyway, grooming is what a pedophile would do to prepare a child to be docile or to receive their sexual, generally that term is used related to sexual abuse. The pedophile gains their trust, makes them feel safe with them, so that when they propose the idea of touching each other in horrific ways, the child is compliant. That's grooming. That is not what we do. That is not what teachers do in the course of our work, and it's certainly not what early childhood educators do. Gay, straight, man, woman. It's a term that's purposefully being misused to find a villain to blame, to find the other to blame. And it's most scary because teachers, who are the backbone of every society, are suddenly, someone decided that that was a good target to distract from what's really happening. And teachers are being used in horrific ways when that word grooming is associated with us.
Yeah. So I think this is maybe where bringing up the idea, first of all, I think the only thing I'd add to that is that for young children, groomers also gain the trust of the parents.
Right.
There's a reason that they're allowing their child to be alone with this person. So in a school setting, generally a teacher isn't alone with children. There's a lot of children. There's often a second teacher. There's other administration in the hallway, and there should be, best practices around that, having policies around when adults are alone with the child. What is the procedures for that? And not just schools, churches, sporting events, or not sporting events, teams, athletics, arts, all of those. So all of them have the potential of an adult and children. And then could the children be alone? So then the grooming is the part that, if we want to think about what keeps children safe from grooming, it's going to be everything the opposite of what people who are using the word grooming talk about. So first of all, statistically speaking, straight cis males are most likely to be the perpetrators. This is true whether it's a wrestling team, whether it's a theater camp, whether it's it is a teacher sometimes, scout troops, church, right? So it's all of these things. But we don't just ban all cis straight males, because the vast majority of straight cis males are not abusers. And the same is true of any other, whether you want to talk about gay cis males or whatever, straight trans men, whatever you want to, whatever combination you want to have. If we're worried about children, we can't start with who we think the perpetrator might be, because statistically speaking, people are way off, and we would have to ban.
We have that information.
We have that information. We would be banning all straight people from being straight men being in any position with children. And so obviously no one agrees with that. Even the people who use that term groomer agree with that.
Yeah.
So what keeps children safe is feeling a sense of connection, feeling part of a community, feeling that their family and the school or the church or whoever all connect and are able to talk about each other's relationships. And then also being comfortable talking about body parts. A sexual abuser finds the kids who are too embarrassed to talk about their penis or their vulva or whatever, because those kids are much less likely to tell.
Yeah.
A kid who says the word
Michael,
penis.
sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
I
go
thought
ahead.
I just heard you say the teacher says that, and I think you meant
No,
to say the abuser says that.
Thank you.
Thank
Did
you,
I say
Richard.
teacher? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It's all right.
And you don't edit these, right? So
I don't. I
let me
could.
correct myself. So
Okay.
an abuser is looking for a child who's afraid to say those words or hesitant to say those words, right? But a child who says, who feels free to say, my vulva's itchy right now. First of all, they're going to get their medical care a lot quicker. UTI, the kid who can't say anything. I remember having a child who was telling me that their wallet was itchy. I had no idea what they were talking about. It turns out that was their
Oh, wow. Okay.
slang they used at home. So they didn't have to say the word vulva. And that was like 3 days the child could have been on medication. But the child who says that would also say, oh yeah, whatever, my, minister, the youth minister was touching my vulva. Right away, right? That brings in, everybody's going to wonder. So they abusers tend to avoid children who are comfortable talking about body parts.
Right.
And that gets back to that quote at the beginning, that talking about those things, the claim is that's the groomer. When the truth is, what keeps children safe, if we are worried about children's safety and not about making people distrust education, or worse, distrust teachers, then, they're two different things, but they're using the term and scare tactics, going right to emotions rather than saying it outright. I don't want gay people working. I don't want trans people working.
Right.
Whether it's a teacher or whatever, but yeah.
Right. I don't want them voting.
I don't want them voting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think for some of the people that this language is aimed at and is going to be effective with, just the idea of a child knowing that there are gay people in the world is child abuse. So some of the people anyway already have that bias. And so arguments and this kind of logic that you guys are presenting
right, but that's where
can be really difficult. Yes.
If that lieutenant governor said, I don't like the fact that there are gay people in this world, and I don't want children to know there are gay people in this world. If she would say that and admit it, and then let people vote on whether she should be in a public office in a state that has many gay and lesbian citizens and trans citizens and things,
right,
then
that's why she won't say it.
Right.
She won't say it because she does not want to be seen as being homophobic. even though that is exactly what she's trying to say.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
she twists it and uses smoke and mirrors to have people believe that she's saying something else. So, there's so many things I want to say on this topic, but I want to just for a moment build off of what Heather just said. That if we even talk about it, we're grooming young children, right? So I just want to back up and say, anyone listening out there who's been in any of my audiences for the last 30 years, any of my students in my college classes have heard me talk ad nauseum and know that there's a sign hanging in my classroom, and it's a PowerPoint in my presentations, that says the job of the early childhood professional is to help children make sense of the world in which they found themselves. That's it. And so understanding that's my belief anyway. So understanding that for me, that's my core mission as an early childhood professional. It means that that my job is multifaceted. And one of the many things that exist in the world are letters and colors and numbers and shapes. And that's why we talk about those things and learn about those things in early childhood education, because they exist in the world and the child just appeared in it and is trying to make sense of it. And so, for example, in my last job, I was the director of a preschool, and my husband was there all the time, playing with the kids, loving the kids, and demonstrating, not purposefully or consciously, but that he loves me. And so it would be impossible to not talk about that, to not acknowledge my existence or the existence of my husband. It would have been impossible in my last preschool teaching job to not acknowledge the parent who on the first day says, my 3-year-old is trans. And so even though his biology is a boy, she goes by this name and she likes to wear girls' clothes. So it comes up in a class. It is not grooming or indoctrination to talk about what that child is experiencing or the other children are noticing. It's just helping all of them make sense of the world in which they found themselves.
Yeah.
Now, that's the other thing that I say to people and have for decades is, it is not our job to transmit our values to other people's children. So if a child says to me, we find a dead worm on the playground, what happens when you die? My response for 40 years has always been, I don't know, what do you think? And we'll sit in a circle and someone will say, I think you go to heaven. And someone else says, I think you go into the ground and you become vitamins. And everyone says their thing, right? Same with where do babies come from? And same with back in the day before gay marriage was legal, was can two boys marry each other? My job was always back in that day was to say, no, they can't. But I noticed that they can love each other. Do you know anyone like that? And then I say, like going back to the death thing, I don't know, but your family has a belief about that, has an idea. So when you go home, find out what your family thinks about that. And then that's for you when you get to be bigger like a grown-up to decide if you want to believe that too. And then I send a letter home to the parents, and I've already told them that at the beginning of the year proactively. Hey, we talked about death today. Hey, we talked about two girls marrying each other today. Hey, we talked about how someone can look like a boy, but say they're a girl, whatever it is. So now tonight, you can tell your child if you think that's right or wrong. That's your role. It's not mine. My job is to just help them make sense of what they experience in the world. And yep, all of these types of people and things that die and things that are born are in the world. And my job is to just say to the child, yep, it sure does. It exists in the world. And your job, parent, is to say, and in our family, we believe that's right or wrong. And when I explained that to myself as a young teacher and got clear on it, and when I explain it to others, that is a statement of professional ethics. And that is literally what separates us from groomers and abusers. Because as professionals, it is not our intention to groom or indoctrinate anyone. It's simply to help them, young children and families, make sense of the world, and then let the family decide what value judgments they want to place around what children are noticing about the world. Sorry, you can hear my passion on that subject, I've been saying it for
Good.
30 years. And
Yeah.
when this grooming indoctrination thing suddenly presented itself, at least to me, in the last almost month or 6 weeks, it triggered so much deep, painful stuff for me. And that's why I reached out to you, Heather, to want to do this podcast, and especially to have Mike there with us.
I'm glad that you did that. Everything you said is so important for people to hear, both if it's a parent hearing this or if it's a teacher hearing this. I think, yeah, that was powerful.
And then I'm going to go back to, yeah, thank you, Richard. I want to go back to the kids again, because now, so first of all, there was just that idea, if we want to do what's going to protect kids, and I talked about what it is, and it's basically all the opposite things of what that cover said. But now let's remember that some of those children are going to be gay,
right?
Lesbian. They probably won't be aware at this younger age about sexual orientation, but they are going to be aware of gender identity. Gender identity, for most people, is developing, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, is all these milestones. Go read the book supporting gender diversity in early childhood classrooms to fairly recent research. I guess it's now 2 years old, but
Nathaniel Flynn, there's another author.
Nathaniel Flynn, yeah.
Okay.
Well, and let me also just jump in and say the anti-bias curriculum,
The new version.
my beloved Pacific Oaks, and that's been around since the early 90s when it first came out, and now it's called Anti-Bias Education. That was the first place that says, research says children begin to notice biological differences among themselves and their friends around age 3.
Yeah.
So that includes biological gender. As it shows up on our bodies.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's evidence now that children not only notice biology, they also notice gender identity.
Right.
And they notice it earlier when the two don't correspond. Why do they keep saying girl for me?
Sure.
Doesn't make sense, right? So assuming, I'm going to make an assumption that the listeners of this show care about children, regardless of what their gender identity is, regardless of who they'll love in the future, regardless of who they love now. And I'm even going to assume that lieutenant governor.
It was the governor.
It was the governor? Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay,
Spokeswoman for the governor said.
Spokeswoman for the governor. Okay.
Yeah.
So we can say it's the governor.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume the governor, if the person was right in front of them, or if it was their nephew, or their niece, or somebody in their own family, they would care about that child, and they would care if that child got disconnected from community because of people treating them the way that we're saying, like, denying a child what a child is telling you, and that child becomes disconnected, that child who suddenly becomes 4 times more likely to commit suicide. I would guess that governor cares if it was someone he knew. And all I want to do is wish that people cared even when it's not their own child. And I know your listeners do, but when I hear that word grooming, that's what gets me the most upset is I know that these laws I see all over the country, because I'm the one who gets the phone calls from families. I know there are children right now, mostly teenagers, who are close to suicide, having suicide ideation. It's increasing in these states where the laws are happening. And I know that I can tell them the statistics, and unless it's someone related to them, that they have to look into the eyes of those parents or that child, they would be doing anything they could to help the child. But when it's other people's children, they don't care. And that's what drives me nuts. And that's why these these terms like grooming, that they don't even believe. If they really did, they would figure out what protected people.
Right.
Child protection in Texas is one of the worst child protection services there is. And they're spending the resources on. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yep, Richard?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mike.
No, it's okay.
You had concluded. I'm sorry. I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay.
In that, it would be nice to believe that every parent would care about their child if it was their child. But we know statistically, and I'm just going to put it out there, and I know that there will be a lot of people who are not going to like what I'm about to say, but there are people out there who value a fundamentalist view of their religion, whether it's Christianity, Islam, or even Orthodox Jews and so many other religions. When they value a belief they have about the teaching of their religion over the needs of their own child, they will reject their child. And the child, as you say, is the odds of suicide in childhood or adolescence skyrockets when they're rejected by a parent. And it's this desire to, and these are who these politicians are aiming for, are the people who would value their abstract belief over the real child in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of Americans in that category, and I think I need to just say it out loud. And
yeah,
sure.
ask,
I think
ask your
both things
listeners
can
to
be
consider.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Both things can be relevant, I guess.
Yeah.
And I guess to me, when I think of laws and the whole reason we have child protection is that if a parent isn't willing to take care of that child, that there's a system that the state considers it their job to take care of that child. And I would hope that as a society, we could at least agree that we want to make sure that children stay alive, that they are healthy, that they love who they want to love. And yeah, I know that there are individuals and there are organizations that go against that, but it's just hard for me. Like, my moral compass doesn't allow for the idea that human life isn't worth
right.
anything.
But to take what you just said, Mike, and apply it to some current events right now, and I'm happy to report that the judicial system just in the last few days has struck at least one of these down, which was a bill or legislation that would have Child Protective Services would have taken the child away if a parent had condoned transgender identity. If they had allowed their pre-adolescent child to begin taking hormones or whatever, that would have been, the parent would have been considered a criminal. And luckily, just a few days ago, I think that was in Texas, the judge said, nope, that's not legal. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, I know we're not talking about teens, but when you start to get into some of those, I think it's a similar moral. What's actually being argued is my religious beliefs say that these people shouldn't exist. And, the truth is the founding of this country was not on specific beliefs, but more that idea that you can believe that, but you still have to let everyone else live their public life, public and private life. To various degrees, right? Whatever you can call me a Pollyanna here for saying that, but
you're a Pollyanna, Mike.
Yeah.
But we need Pollyannas.
We do. But I'm the old jaded queen here. So I'm going to say, no, I don't know. Keep going, y'all. I'm just feeling very emotional about this conversation.
I want to get it back
Me
to the
too.
grooming
Please do.
specifically.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
But I don't know, Heather, you're the host. Do you
Well,
want to?
I know.
Yeah.
I was
Say
also
something brilliant,
struggling with some emotion there. I'm sorry. Hang on.
So I just want to mention to listeners and viewers that the Queen Nerd just now did something she's never done it in any podcast I've ever been in. I don't know if this is a first, but it's certainly rare. There was a moment where all three of us were really so emotional about this topic. Heather had to pause for all three of us to kind of collect ourselves and calm down and reorient on the best use of the rest of this podcast. I want to thank Heather for doing that, for taking care of Mike and I and herself in that way. And I tell the story of it because I want your listeners and viewers to understand yet again the depth of passion and anger and sorrow around this topic. And so we're going to move on in just a moment to what wonderful early childhood professionals should be doing and are doing. But before we do, I do just want to say yet again, to anyone out there who doesn't know this, that if you don't already know this, our governmental system was broken long before any of us came on the scene. And when Donald Trump came on view and said he wanted to drain the swamp, that was attractive to so many of us, including me, because I viewed our government as a swamp, and I still view it that way. But I was also aware that he and so many like him were manipulating us to vilify the government, just the way that other people are now vilifying people like me, for example, right? So yes, I believe that our government is dysfunctional, and that was one of his main messages. But what he's gone about doing was to warp that and that message. And so now we live in this world where our politicians who are their primary motivation is power and money. And you have to view the world that way, and it's hard for Pollyannas, but for jaded people like me, it's easy. You have to understand that's what's happening. That's why we're not getting the gun regulations we want. And that's why fucked up statements like teachers are groomers if they just talk about what's actually happening in the world. They're not saying it out of a place of religious piety. They're saying it to manipulate the voters who are people of religious piety. And you need to understand that all of those things are at play in this world around us, and be literate about our society and informed as you make a decision, especially this fall, who to vote for. Thank you for allowing me to say that. Now we want to make sure to bring it back to early childhood education.
Yeah.
And what we know we're already doing, and the best of us will continue to do for young children.
Yeah, when we were all sort of pausing to recover, we decided that now's the time for the conversation about what wonderful teachers do to support children in these areas. All children. I mean, I think it's important to say this is valuable for all children, not just, I mean, of course it's valuable to be inclusive in these ways for a child who feels like people talk about me as a boy, but that doesn't seem to really fit, or the child who has two moms or two dads and then suddenly sees that reflected. It's important for them, certainly, but it's important for every child in that space and every family in that space too. So that being said, what does really great positive support look like in the real world, in real practice?
And I'd say anti-bias education. Yeah, the anti-bias education books are certainly good places to start with that if you haven't. But I think the main thing is, if we take family structure first, you just kind of laid that out for us. Just that idea that recognizing the family structures that exist in your classroom, that a child needs to feel seen, and they need to feel that their family is seen. And that, if you're not doing that, it doesn't matter what else you do. You have to start with that. And when you see that, it therefore means that all the other children are going to hear about ways that their family might be different than other families. So I think certainly the starting point is just to really celebrate the families that are there. And sometimes that means talking about some hard stuff too, of your dad's not around right now because he's stationed overseas, or he's in prison, or whatever, or whatever it is, but acknowledging those things too. That all children need to know that their family is valued, seen, part of the community, just as much as they are in the community.
Yeah, I had one interview with a family when I was a center director with a family. The child was 2, I think, that they wanted to enroll, and we were just doing an interview at the beginning of the process, and it started with conversations about creationism and whether we taught evolution. It was like, we don't really use that word in any of our stuff, but then it went to same-sex parents, and I said, you'll see photos in the classrooms because we have those families here and we want them represented. And
even if we didn't, we need to still have those.
Right. But they requested that we take them out of the classroom. And then I said, well, you're still going to see them in the hallway because they're here. And then they were like, well, if you could tell us what time they drop off, we can like, they were going to such lengths to just completely avoid something that was just part of our everyday.
Right. And for me, the only response would be, it doesn't sound like this is the right
Yeah, they did not
program
come.
for your family.
Yeah.
Because this subject is much bigger than the pictures on the walls. And I get that
Yeah.
that's the piece that you hooked onto and occurred to you. But the ideas behind those pictures come up in conversations
Mhm.
every day. And if you want your child to not be part of that, this isn't the right program.
Yeah.
No? I'll give another just really sort of benign example of what Mike was just talking about, which is, so, in my first year of teaching as a young teacher, way back when, I was so excited to have my parent board and to have parent teacher conferences and to sit on the PTA. I was the teacher representative on the PTA. And then in my second year of teaching, I had a child whose parents had died, and the child was being raised by her grandparents. And I suddenly realized, oh, I can't use the word parent board. I can't call it a PTA, and I can't call them parent teacher conferences anymore. If my goal is to respect every family, I need to come up with a different set of terms. So they became a family board and family teacher conferences, and family teacher association is what I advocated for with our program. No one had a problem with that. Everyone felt, oh yeah, we have
Grandparent.
that.
Yeah.
But when it becomes two dads and there's an aspect, you can't say the word homosexual without sex. And we're just, as a society, we're so messed up about sex and all that kind of stuff that before that compassion can come up for people, the fears and the biases come up. And so while they can have immediately support calling it families because of those grandparent-led families, they're really suddenly have issues when it's a family led by two moms or two dads. And I get it. I understand the world we live in, and it's my job to help people grow beyond that into hopefully a world where we can all treat everybody with respect and let go of all that energy we have around things. And yet again, notice the people in power that want us to continue to have that energy for their own personal gain.
It makes me think too, if a child brought it up, like, well, you can't have two moms. I think it's okay to tell the child, oh, you haven't met someone with two moms. Oh, yeah. So, and I remember saying this to one 4-year-old who asked me, or maybe it's a 3-year-old now, I can't remember, but like, why does Timmy have two moms? And I said, oh, well, Mama Joni is one of the moms and Mama Cindy is the other mom. So that makes two. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that was it, right? It was.
Then it's
Can I have
math.
a goldfish cracker?
Yeah. So
Right.
that for
We
early
make them
childhood,
really important. The children, they're like, oh, that makes sense. Give me a goldfish.
right? Like I haven't experienced it before, so I'm curious. But now you've told me, and like, okay,
Or I've gotten in the past, well, but my mom says it's wrong.
right?
Oh, okay, all right. Your mom's allowed to believe that. That's
Yeah.
okay. What do you believe, Richard? Doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is your mom's allowed to believe that, and you can believe anything you want. And I'm very careful to not put my belief into my professional workplace. That's just an ethical stand I take. But I will, because the other thing I want to bring up around this thing is you hear, let me just mention that the other thing that led me to reaching out to you, Heather, was that I had two experiences on my Zen and the Art of Early Childhood Education page, which, by the way, is about to become just Zen and the Art of Early Childhood as soon as Heather's next podcast.
By the time this episode comes out, that one will have been
happened.
Yep.
Right? And if that's intriguing to you, you'll understand why when you listen to that podcast. But anyways, I had put an article out about a gay male teacher in Florida who was accused of being a groomer and was so distraught, quit his job. Not just distraught, had death threats and all those things. And it was a really powerful article. And many, I don't know if many is the right word, a noticeable number of Zen readers lost their freaking minds. And they were 100%. And again, I'm not trying to bash a group of people. I'm just telling you the facts of who lost their minds, who began posting misinformation and horrible broad statements about teachers being groomers and all that. They were 100% white Christian readers. And so that's just important to note. Doesn't mean being white. I'm not saying being white and Christian is bad. I'm telling you the people who responded
the
in that
trend
way
that you
fell into
saw.
those demographics. And aren't you curious about that?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so I suddenly had to ban all of these people because they were saying horrific things, not just about this one young man, but about teachers in general, and how, yes, we are grooming. Yes, those teachers are indoctrinating. And look at that one from 5 years ago in Seattle. Yeah, there was one, but there's millions of teachers, and
Mm-hmm.
you need to back up on your broad statements. People's lives are at stake.
Mm-hmm.
And then it happened again a few weeks ago, and another wave of hatred and me having to ban people. And I'm like, what is happening in our society? Why are we suddenly focusing on grooming? And I'm sorry, once again, I got emotional and lost my train of thought, what we had been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Where had we been?
I don't know.
Well, I mean, we were mostly talking about what you do in the class.
Oh yeah, what's it look like
Yeah,
when you're
sorry, I got
supporting
way off
children
the
in
point.
this way? That's okay. That's okay.
And it is a thing of, I think, being very matter of fact in the classroom.
Yes.
Another example, I'm trying to think. Well, I'm going to use a different example. This has to do with race, but I think it gets to the same way kids think about things.
Mm-hmm. They're mad about race in schools too. So
yeah, here we go. Because one child's like looking at me and just said, why? So here in Minnesota, we don't have a very large Latinx population, but a quickly growing Mexican-American population.
Mm.
And so there's, in the neighborhood where I was teaching, there was a lot of Mexican-Americans. And the child just asked, why do people with black hair speak Spanish?
Mm.
Right? And so kind of just going to the quote you use all the time, Richard, was, you're noticing
Mm-hmm.
that people in our neighborhood with black hair speak Spanish. And as it just so happened, the 4-year-old next to me with blonde hair also was from Paraguay and spoke Spanish. So I said, well, she speaks Spanish too, and she doesn't have black hair. And he's like, really?
Mm-hmm.
And the child who was speaking was Asian American and had black hair. And I think maybe what he was wondering is, I'm the only person, like my family's the only people with black hair that don't speak Spanish. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
But then the girl, sure enough, she started, we talked a little bit in Spanish. And he's like, oh, and I just said, yeah, the people that you see in our neighborhood come from a place called Mexico, where a lot of people speak Spanish and a lot of people have black hair.
Mm-hmm.
Or something. And I think that's about as far as the conversation went, because then he went on to, we were eating snack at the time. So actually it probably did then go to, can I have more goldfish? Correct.
Yeah, we did my most recent example, I guess, because I don't do direct care anymore. When I was at the preschool at Purdue, we read a book about families or something like that, just as a part of our story time. And we did I asked each family to send a photo that just we could like project or hang on the wall, so that children could talk about their families. And I had my whole family, and my youngest is trans and has a girlfriend named Maggie. And I introduced who each of the people in my family were. And I said, that's Josie, who has had, in this picture at least, a lot of characteristics of a woman, if you were looking. And then Maggie, who identifies as a woman, is a woman. Anyway, so they were looking at that picture, and I just said, yep, that's Josie, and that's Josie's girlfriend, Maggie. And, that's my Steve, and there's me. And, it was just over. But then as the day went on, I noticed a couple of children would just go to that picture and just kind of look at it. And so I'd say, you're really looking at my family, and wait and see. And if they had said something like, why is your girl with a girl, why is your girl's a girlfriend, whatever that question might be, then I could have, given more information. But I don't have to volunteer a lot of stuff they're not ready for. They might have just liked Josie's pink hair, or they might have actually been wondering why my son has long hair or something like that. But if I had heard that question, I could have just matter-of-factly responded to it, but I didn't have to assume that's what their question was either.
Right. Smart.
So I think this image is that we're just constantly pushing and talking about it, and whether it's relevant or not, it's always the biggest part of what we're doing. When it really is just these moments of making sure families are represented in the classroom, making sure that we're responding matter-of-factly to the questions they do have or the comments they do make. Looking at our books to make sure we don't have any biases reflecting in those books. It doesn't have to be like, okay, it's the third week of September and my theme box says we're doing gay this week.
Right. It's L for lesbian. We don't do that.
Right. And I think that's the biggest thing is, we are supporting kids, word you want to use, acknowledging the statements they're making and having a conversation with them. And, it struck me when you were telling that story, Heather, that the people who use these terms wouldn't have had a problem with you talking about Steve.
Right.
Sure, of course.
Which is telling us about your sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't assume, and I don't think Richard did either, that you were telling us anything about any sexual. We know nothing about what you and Steve do.
Ooh, no,
For
we
all
don't
we
know
know,
that.
you have separate rooms. You've never even shaken hands before, right?
Right.
Oh.
Nailed it.
Yeah. Sorry, I just outed you. No, but we don't know any of that.
Yeah.
And the truth is we don't know anything about Josie and Maggie. Or
Mm-hmm.
We don't know anything about them either.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm sure they don't do anything. Sorry.
Which is fine. But I think that when people think that merely saying two people's names and maybe attaching a word like partner, girlfriend, wife, spouse, whatever, somehow implies that we are then talking about sex. Right. And so that's often the word when they
right.
say sexual orientation, but then they'll say we shouldn't talk about sex. But the truth is people aren't talking about sex.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's a big difference. Right. And it's and I think that's one of those ones that gets conflated sometimes. And yeah, if I was talking about the way two people are having sex, that would be inappropriate. It would be abuse in and of itself. But that's not what we're actually talking about. But but there's this conflation. I think one is people are implying that the other thing automatically happens simply because we're talking about a relationship that's not heterosexual.
It's not in the norm.
Yeah.
It's not in the norm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I to build on that, and I just want to add, and Heather, I'm aware
we're going real long, but you just keep going.
It's going to be 2 episodes.
I can do that if I need to.
I'm shooting for 3. To build on that last podcast we did that people will have already hopefully listened to, but before they listen to this one, people say, Mike was using the term talked about. We talked about this with the kids, and you and I, Heather, as listeners, we understand the way Mike is using that term, right? But when you don't know early childhood, and how many times have we talked about that on this podcast, you apply your ideas of teachers of older children, and you think that term talk about is synonymous with teach, like this was a lesson plan to teach that thing. But in early childhood, this is what I talked about in that last podcast. I'm done with the word education. I'm done with the word teacher. I'm done with the word teach. We don't teach anything. We facilitate their play and we follow their lead. If where they're leading us is, why do people with black hair speak Spanish? I'll go there with you because my job is to follow your lead, right? And not tell you you're right or wrong or place my value judgments on that. So in early childhood education, at least for me and the best early educators I know, we don't teach anything. We facilitate discussions about what children notice in the world, and stuff comes up. And it's important for people to understand that that's uniquely different methodologically than teaching a topic to an older children. And so I just want to put that out there as well.
Yeah. I think that's really helpful. And the implication or conflation that I was saying, yeah, that explains it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, because people think that children learn by being talked to, like, because just to go back to your use of the phrase "talking about," Mike, and in fact, we know that that's not even what we should be doing in early childhood. Children don't learn by being talked to about any subject. They learn by playing and doing and discovering, and we're just there to help, expand their experience. And when you understand that, you know that it's not possible for us to teach them about some fill in the blank subject that's not appropriate, or even to groom or indoctrinate them. It's literally not possible in the definition of good early childhood education. It's not what we're about as a profession.
Right. And we could use resources towards helping people learn how to facilitate discussions with children and all of these things. And that would could help drum out the people who are groomers, who are, because they're not, like, percentage wise, we're not talking about, they're in society everywhere. We could talk about, we could choose any industry, whatever, the abusers in the financial sector, the abusers in this or that.
Or your family.
So, yeah, I don't know where it's going. I was trying to go towards wrapping up, and
thanks. I appreciate
totally
the attempted assist.
Yeah, sorry about that. I lost.
That's okay.
Maybe that's it, Heather. Maybe that's Mike's inelegant segue to wrapping up.
Hey, that's my job, to have an elegant segue.
You do it so well.
To the end, yeah. Well, this has been. I just appreciate you both doing this so much, and
thank you so much for doing it with us.
Yeah, no, I hope that people listen to this and listen all the way through and really, I'm sure we'll get comments, but that's part of the process. And I hope we do. I mean, I hope it engages people that much that they want to continue the conversation. So thank you again, both, for being here. Thanks everybody for listening. And it was really a much more serious topic than serious tone than we usually have. So I appreciate it all. And thank you, everybody. We'll be back again next week with another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.
Bye.
Goodbye.
We love